All right, so let's dive right into this. Today we're going to be looking at the Canadian political scene, specifically some recent rumblings around the future of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And we've got a global news article and a bunch of folks on Reddit going back and forth on it. And the big headline here, right, is this Liberal MP, Anthony Housefather, is calling on Trudeau to step down.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not just the fact that he's calling for his resignation, but the timing of it, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing this against the backdrop of some really bad poll numbers
Yeah.
for the Liberals, and then you've got the recent resignation of Chrystia Freeland. All of this kind of adds, another layer of what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Lots of uncertainty. So let's get into it. Let's break down this global news article. Housefather really doesn't hold back, does he? He gives a bunch of reasons why he thinks Trudeau should resign. But I feel like the main one, the big one, is that Canadians just aren't confident in his leadership.
And if you look at the Ipsos poll that they cite in the article, it's pretty wild. Like 75% of Canadians want him to resign. And I mean, the Liberals are only sitting at 20% support. Those are some pretty bad numbers. I think the question becomes, what is driving that dissatisfaction? Is it specific policies? Is it general economic anxieties? Or has it just been, so many years with Trudeau that people are just kind of over it?
Yeah, that fatigue factor is real. And it makes you wonder, too, like, okay, so we've got this one MP who's been pretty vocal, but what's happening behind closed doors? Like, is there a bigger movement within the Liberal caucus?
Right, and that's the big question, right? Housefather's claiming that, the vast majority of the caucus wants Trudeau gone, but no one's, actually saying that publicly. And there's a lot of pressure to maintain that united front, especially when you have, the opposition kind of smelling blood in the water.
Totally. And the article even mentions that all the opposition parties are ready to vote non-confidence in the government. And they're going to do it as soon as they can. Just as a quick refresher, can you tell us what that actually means and what might happen?
Yeah, so a vote of non-confidence is basically a test to see if the government still has the support of the House of Commons. And if the majority votes against the government, then they have to resign. And then the Governor General, they would typically call an election. And of course, in a minority government situation like Canada has, it's kind of, it's always this threat looming in the background. But with where the Liberals are at right now, it feels like a very real possibility.
Yeah, so this isn't just like political games. This could actually result in Trudeau being kicked out, even if he just, refuses to resign, which makes it even more interesting. I was reading through some of these Reddit comments, and one user, Euler Radio Pick, I think that's their username, they were talking about the timeline of this whole thing. And it sounds like if Trudeau were to resign, then they'd have to choose a new leader. And this could mean proroguing Parliament. Can you remind us what exactly that means and what the implications might be?
Yeah, so prorogation basically means that the Prime Minister gets to suspend Parliament. So all legislative activity, committee work, everything is put on hold. That's often been used to kind of, reset the agenda, like start fresh. But it's also been criticized a lot because it can be seen as this way to avoid scrutiny. So, in this case, if they were to prorogue Parliament until a new leader was chosen, that could mean months without any kind of legislative progress, which might not be very popular with the public, who's already kind of frustrated.
Right, so that means no debates, no votes, no committees meeting, and this is happening while people are dealing with all these really important issues like cost of living. I can definitely see why some people would have a problem with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a controversial tool. And I think if it were to be used in this situation, it would spark a lot of debate. I mean, historically, prorogation's been used in Canada for lots of different reasons. Transitions between governments or when there's been scandals. But it always brings up these questions of transparency, accountability.
Right, for sure. And the Reddit thread was interesting to see because you had people who were just really cynical about the whole thing. Like one user, I think it was Shark to Poto Pris Prime, they called all the MPs cowards because they're only kind of jumping ship now that they're worried about losing their seats.
Yeah. I think that cynicism is understandable. It's easy to look at this and think, well, the party's in trouble, so of course they're jumping ship now. But then you also have people defending Housefather, like Morgott Please, called him a principled moderate. And they see him as someone who's trying to do what's best for the country.
It's so interesting to see how people can interpret the same situation in such different ways, right? There was this one comment that really stuck with me, though. This user, Backlight 101, they pointed out that there might be way more dissent within the Liberal caucus than we even realize. Because publicly, they might have to show this united front, but privately, who knows?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, politics can be a lot about appearances.
Yeah.
And criticizing your own leader can be, really bad for your career, even if you do have legitimate concerns. So it's possible that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Maybe there's this whole group of people quietly questioning Trudeau's leadership.
It makes you wonder if this is just about Trudeau himself, or if it speaks to these bigger issues within the Liberal Party as a whole.
And that brings us to a really fascinating point that another Reddit user made. Funky Frunkle, I think was their username. They were saying that maybe just swapping out the leader wouldn't be enough. That maybe the Liberal Party needs to do this complete overhaul to address the underlying problems.
Okay, so we've got this potential leadership crisis, plummeting public support, a looming non-confidence vote, and a lot of people calling for change. Before we get into all of that, I'm curious, what are your initial reactions to all of this? What are you thinking? What questions are coming up for you?
It's definitely it's touched a nerve, right? And I think it's because it's not just about like the ins and outs of politics. It's really about, what direction is the country headed in and how does that affect people's lives?
Yeah, and to understand what's at stake, we should probably break down some of these ideas. Like we talked about that potential non-confidence vote,
Hmm.
which could mean an election way sooner than anyone was expecting. How does that affect the way the government makes decisions in the coming months?
Well, if there's an election coming up, the focus tends to shift to more short-term things. It's about, appealing to voters
Hmm.
rather than actually tackling those long-term challenges.
Right, so it's more about trying to get votes than actually fixing problems.
Exactly. And that can lead to, a lack of progress on important issues. And you often see this increase in like partisan politics, right?
Mhm.
More divisive rhetoric because everyone's trying to position themselves for the election.
So instead of, working together to figure out how to deal with the cost of living or housing affordability, we're just going to get more political games and empty promises.
It's definitely a possibility.
Not very reassuring. And speaking of things that are a bit unsettling, we haven't even talked about the big elephant in the room, Chrystia Freeland's resignation. You said earlier that this was a big deal for the Liberals. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So Freeland was seen by a lot of people as, the natural successor to Trudeau. She had a pretty good track record and a decent amount of public support. So her resigning, it creates this like power vacuum.
Yeah.
And it raises questions about who can step in, if anyone.
It's interesting, though, because when I was reading the Reddit thread, some people were saying that this could actually be a good thing for the Liberals. Like maybe this is what they need, a fresh start, a new leader, to regain some of that trust and connect with voters again.
Yeah, there's definitely that possibility of a reset, right? A new leader could bring new ideas, some fresh energy, maybe even distance themselves from, some of the baggage that comes with the Trudeau era.
But like some of those Reddit users pointed out, just changing the leader might not be enough. They were saying there are these deeper issues within the Liberal Party. What do you think about that?
I think that's a valid point. I mean, whoever takes over is going to inherit the legacy of the Trudeau government, the good and the bad. So they're going to have to address those concerns that have led to this drop in public support, whether it's the perception of being out of touch or the handling of the economy or the lack of progress on things like affordable housing and climate change.
So it's not as easy as just finding a new leader. The Liberals have a lot of work to do if they want to win back the confidence of Canadians.
Exactly. It's about showing that they understand the challenges people are facing and that they have real solutions.
Okay, so let's think about this from the perspective of the average Canadian. Like, what does all this political uncertainty actually mean for them? How could it affect their day-to-day life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, political instability can affect everything. The economy, social programs, Canada's place on the world stage.
And you mentioned earlier that businesses and investors might be hesitant to make big decisions right now because everything's so uncertain. How could that affect things like jobs and economic growth?
Well, if businesses are worried about the future, they're probably going to hold back on things like investments and hiring, and that can lead to slower economic growth, maybe even job losses. And if the economy weakens, it makes it harder for the government to fund important social programs.
So this isn't just some political drama happening in Ottawa. It could actually affect people's finances, their jobs, their access to essential services.
It really underscores why it's so important for people to stay informed and to be engaged in the political process, because the decisions that our leaders make have real consequences for everyone.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to that question we were talking about earlier. If there is a change in leadership, what qualities should Canadians be looking for in a new prime minister? What would show that they're the right person to lead the country through all of this?
That's a great question. We need someone who has the experience and the skills to govern effectively,
Mm-hmm.
but they also need to have the vision, the integrity, the empathy to unite a divided nation and tackle these complex challenges?
So we've talked about a lot, this potential leadership crisis, the possibility of an early election. And it seems like a lot of people are just really disillusioned with the whole political process. It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all the uncertainty, right? But I have to say, like, in the midst of all of this, I'm actually feeling a little bit hopeful.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, I was thinking back to that Reddit discussion, and there was this one thread where people were talking about what they want to see in a new prime minister. And it wasn't just about specific policies, it was about, like, character, leadership qualities.
I see.
And it felt like people were looking for something different, something more than just the same old political games.
What kind of things were they saying?
They were talking about integrity, empathy, a genuine commitment to actually serving the public good.
It sounds like there's this real desire for authenticity, for leaders who, put people's needs before their own ambitions.
Yeah. Exactly. And one user, I think it was Morgoth, please, they said something like, we need a leader who understands that their job is to serve the country, not their own career. And it sounds so simple, but it really stuck with me.
Yeah, it speaks to this idea of principled leadership, right? Someone who's guided by a sense of duty and a real commitment to making a positive impact.
Right. And it can't just be words, right? People want to see action, real results that actually improve their lives.
Of course, being the next prime minister, they're going to need to actually demonstrate that they understand the challenges Canadians are facing and that they have, real practical solutions. They need to be decisive, take action, and be able to work with others to get things done.
So it's not just about finding someone new, it's about a whole new approach to leadership.
Exactly.
Someone who embodies those values of integrity, empathy, and a commitment to serving the country.
And, as messy as this whole situation is, maybe it's an opportunity for a real shift in Canadian politics, a chance to move away from all the division and cynicism.
So maybe it's not just a crisis, but a chance to redefine what leadership means in Canada.
And remember, this isn't something we just watch from the sidelines. We all have a role to play in shaping that change. By having these conversations, holding our leaders accountable, and demanding better, we can help create the kind of Canada we want to live in.
That's such an important point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The future of Canada is being shaped right now, and we all have a part in it. What role do you want to play? What qualities are you looking for in the next leader of this country? Think about it, stay engaged, and remember, even in the midst of all this uncertainty, there's always hope.